Hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be among you today to tell you about dragonflies. Usually, as you have seen when we tell about conservation, we tell about birds. I guess that among you there is a lot of bird watchers, but I will tell you about dragonflies and be sure that they are also flying, so it should be okay with them. So yes, how can we consider dragonfly conservation within saline areas? Well, as you probably know, freshwaters are very important ecosystems as they support 10% of species richness among the world when they only occupy 3% of the earth cover. So this is a good point, but a bad point is that the wetland cover is still decreasing, although our conservation efforts. And one of the main reasons is change in land use. For instance, you have this picture of a Burgas area where we can guess the wetlands, and you can see that there are agricultural fields and urbanization, which has taken progress. So wetlands are a priority ecosystems for conservation, and restoration of wetlands and even recreation of wetlands are key strategies for their conservation. Among freshwaters, Mediterranean temporary ponds are especially threatened. They are freshwaters which are flooded a part of the year and which face a drought season during another part of the year. And another type of freshwaters is brackish waters, and they act as a buffer habitat between saline waters and fresh waters strictly, I mean. And here you have, as an example, brackish waters in Corsica Island. And this is where a river meets the sea. And so you have this mixture between the seawater and freshwater. So salinity of brackish water is usually between 0.5 and 15 grams per liter. And they show a specific flora and fauna, which is very adapted to such physical conditions. What about dragonflies? Well, dragonflies have aquatic larvae. This is why, although there are flying insects in there, they are really related to freshwaters for their reproduction. They are top predators. It means that they have a key position within the arthropod or say invertebrate communities. They are good indicators of habitat change, of changes concerning their quality, especially. There are insects which are receiving more and more attention. Among insects, dragonflies are the best known, most probably. And they also have a good public image. So the idea is to use Leicestershire macrostigma as a flagship species for the conservation of Mediterranean temporary ponds, and especially brackish Mediterranean temporary ponds. So who is this guy? Who is Leicestershire macrostigma? This species is basically living in lowland and especially in the coastal area in temporary brackish waters. Here you have the distribution of the species within Europe. You can see that its distribution is very fragmented. It is absolutely not continuous. And here you have a zoom on Albania, and there are only 3 records, apparently, of that species in the area. And one of them has been made in 1996 in Seman Delta, which is not so far from Norta Lagoon. But yet there are no more records of that species. So we don't know if it is still present or if it has disappeared from Albania. Macrosigma is a threatened species at the European level, according to the IUCN Red List. It is concerned by conservation policies, such as the National Action Plan in France for the conservation of dragonflies. At the European scale, it has been assessed as a species a deserving addition to the Habitat Directive list. So for those reasons, it is a good candidate for conservation programs such as LIFE programs. But if we want to use that species as a flagship, we have to know its ecological needs and see if it can be achieved in different protected areas. So what is the life cycle of Leicestershire macrosigma? Here you see that in summer, usually temporary ponds are facing a drought period. And then from autumn to spring, there is a flooding period. So during the drought period, Leicestershire macrosigma is laying eggs within the plant material. Here you have a zoom, you can see one stem of plant, and inside you can see eggs which have been laid by females. After egg laying, there is a very long diapause period during the whole summer, autumn, and the beginning, summer, autumn, winter, and even the beginning of spring. And so during this period, the egg is staying within the plant material. Then from late March, larvae are hatching, are growing, and during May, we have the emergence period, which is the moment when the aquatic larvae is getting as an adult in the air. But now there are several other ecological considerations, and first, a so-called preference for the cyclobrush, which is Bulbochenus maritimus. This is these plants growing usually in brackish waters. And there is a preference for this plant species during oviposition site selection by female. You see that females are laying more eggs into this plant and also into Juncus maritimus, another plant growing in such habitat. Adults are laying more eggs within 1 minute compared to other plants. So it means that adults have a better fitness when they are using this plant species. Also, when we consider egg survival, there is a better egg survival if temporary ponds are flooded in fall, in autumn. At least egg survival is better than if the temporary pond is flooded in winter or even in early spring. And usually this plant, Bulbochenus maritimus, the cyclobrush, is growing into the lowest part of the temporary pond. So it means that this part are the first to be flooded by rainfalls. So laying eggs into this plant provides also a better fitness to the progeny of adults which have laid eggs into these plant species. Then what about the effect of salinity levels on the physiology and life history traits of larvae? Well, here you see that when the salinity level is increasing, the growth rate of larvae is decreasing. And if we have a look at adults, here you have the salinity larvae have faced during their growth. And here you have the cellular energy allocation of adults. And you see that also the physiology of adults is decreasing if salinity level has been too high during larval growth. So it means that although we can only find Leicestershire macrosigma in brackish waters, it is a species which is able to grow and even have a better fitness in fresh waters. So it means that there are other factors other than salinity which have an effect on its ecology. So what about its abundance variations? Here you have, as I recall, the life cycle of Lestes macrosigma. And of course, the flooding period can depend on rainfalls. You know that in the Mediterranean climate, rainfalls are especially unpredictable. And so flooding period can be earlier than October and can be also later than this period. And also, if rainfalls are rare in spring, the drought period can be earlier than May or can be later than June. So what happened? Well, if the temporary pond is already dry at the moment of larvae should emerge, of course, you will have no emergence because larvae will die. Larvae need water for their growth. But if the flooding period is longer, you will have first some emergencies of adults in May, but also in June. So you will have a greater abundance of adults if the flooding period is longer in spring. Then what can happen in autumn for the flooding period? If the flooding period is early, you have also other species which are still on the wings, such as here Anax parthenope. And if those species are able to lay eggs, then those eggs will hatch and larvae will start their growth during winter. And during next spring, larvae of that species will be really big, at least bigger than Lestes macrostigma larvae, and they will be predators of Lestes macrostigma. So abundance of Lestes macrostigma will be lower in next spring if in the previous autumn period, flooding has been early. And on another hand, if flooding period is late, well, those species, competitors and predators will not lay eggs. And so if there are no eggs, there are no larvae. And Lestes macrostigma larvae in next spring will not have any competitors or predators, and abundance will be bigger. So there is a direct and indirect effects of the flooding period on the abundance of Lestes macrostigma. So with all that knowledge, where can we go for Lestes macrostigma conservation and management of its habitat? Well, first of all, we will target the growth of Bulbochenus maritimus, the cycler brush. Here you have a picture of Pomory Lagoon area with a really large patch of Bulbochenus maritimus, the cycler brush. Sorry for having to think to that word. And you see that this plant is still, during the drought period, is remaining somewhat green. So it protects also the eggs from desiccation. We will ask we will recommend managers if we are able to manage for a dry period starting from June until late autumn for the reasons I have just explained before. Okay, 1 minute until I will fasten a bit. So if we can manage water for that, let's do that. We will try also to manage for salinity levels by adding some fresh waters if salinity levels is too high. For monitoring, we will try to monitor the water levels, the salinity levels, and also rainfalls to see if our target hydrological functioning is reaching our goals. We will be able also to monitor plant species, for example, as here in Pomory Lagoon with using a drone. And of course, we will monitor the dragonfly assemblage of the area. So what could we recommend for Narta Lagoon? First, it will be to assess which is the dragonfly assemblage in the area with a focus on Lestes macrosigma. Then to assess the conservation status of those species, and especially Lestes macrosigma, and then consider opportunities for habitat management and restoration in order to allow that endangered species to breed. And if needed, we could also train local people to odontology and management targeting dragonflies. Thank you for your attention, and sorry for the 30 seconds I used more.